We are live. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to wait for more folks to join in. We'll probably wait for 30 seconds and then we get the conversation going. All right, let's start. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Be Waste Wise. I am Shweta Dandapani. I'm one of the community builders at Be Waste Wise. And today we're all here to join the second webinar of a very exciting series with Global Waste Lab and Zoe Linkovich, Built to Last, the Foundations of Resilient Waste Systems. Be Waste Wise is very excited to partner with Global Waste Lab and Zoe on this series. In today's webinar, the second webinar, we are going to be discussing evidence base. We have Pushkar Pradhan, CEO and founder of EcoSense Enviro Solutions, who will discuss more about this in the course of the next 1 hour. A few housekeeping thoughts for all of you. Please use the Q&A section for your questions. We do intend a large attendance, so it might get lost in chat. And please use the chat to introduce yourselves, or if you have any comments, any other study report that you want to share about, please feel free to use chat. So over to you now, Zoe.
Thank you, Sweta, and welcome everyone. Very excited to be here again. Last week, Mayor Talib Bensouda opened the Built to Last series by showcasing what leadership and governance can really achieve. So under his leadership, Canifing Municipal Council increased waste collection from 4 to 76%, created jobs, strengthened its systems, and improved the management at Bokote dump site. He described waste management and economic development as a two-way relationship. Okay, so growing economies generate more waste and need better services, while clean, green cities protect people, attract investment, and enable further prosperity. So Canifing's progress is striking, and the figures help us understand its scale. But evidence is not only something we collect afterwards to demonstrate success. It should help us understand the problem, decide what to do, avoid expensive mistakes, and improve services as they develop. The Built to Last series explores Global Waste Lab's 7 foundations of a resilient waste project, developed through years of field experience and research for the United Nations Global Waste Management Outlook 2024. The series runs up to the International Solid Waste Association's World Congress in London this November, my home city, very excited, where Global Waste Lab is a knowledge partner, and the Chartered Institution of Waste Management has endorsed this series for continuing professional development. So our wheel is back, as you can see. The foundations are interconnected. And as I said in session 1, we need waste systems to keep on rolling, which is one of the reasons it's a nice wheel. Today, we focus on the second foundation, a strong evidence base. For this session, I've grouped it into 3 practical elements. Baseline understanding means knowing what waste is generated, where, whether it's by households or businesses, for example, what happens to it now, and what local conditions can help shape the system. Informed decisions mean using that knowledge to choose services, routes, vehicles, facilities, technologies, and budgets that fit the real context. And monitoring and adaptation mean using operational data and community feedback to see what's working, to identify problems and improve over time. A strong evidence base does not mean waiting for perfect data. In many places, reliable information is scarce, research budgets are small, if not tiny, and conditions change quickly. Estimates and assumptions are sometimes unavoidable. The challenge is to be honest about uncertainty, test the assumptions that could make or break a decision, and keep learning. Now then, before I introduce Pushkar, our first quick poll. Sweta is going to put that up on the screen now, doing a brilliant job. Thank you so much, Sweta. We're interested to hear from you. How many people do we have live? 53 people live. That's great. Thank you so much. Welcome. We're keen to understand your context so that we can then shape the discussion around that later on. So, with the waste systems that you're working with, what do you think is the most important evidence gap at the moment? Is it waste quantities and composition? So you're not sure how much or what's in it? Is it your collection coverage and material flows? So do you know who's collecting what and where that material is going? Is it costs, markets, and financial performance? So how much are households and businesses being charged for their waste collection, if at all? How much is it costing the council or other actors? Are materials being sold into markets? Do we have a record of how much the costs and income are? Is it the health, environmental, and climate impacts? Yeah, or co-benefits, depending on which way we're looking at it? Or are we just not sure? The unknown unknowns. So if you'd like to cast your votes, Pushkar, Swetha, and I are not allowed to vote, so it's all over to you. And we have the results up, and it's a fairly good spread. So not many of you don't know what data you need, but of the other four, quantities and composition, collection coverage and material flows, costs and markets, and the health, environmental, and climate impacts, it's a pretty good spread, about a quarter each. So that's really helpful. And good to have your involvement here. So this is all going to help shape the discussion as we go on. Right, now then, I'm going to be introducing Pushkar. I first met Pushkar at the ISWA World Congress in Kuala Lumpur in 2018, and I'm very happy to have him with us today. Pushkar is CEO and co-founder of EcoSense Enviro Solutions. His work connects baseline studies and city waste modelling with GIS, GPS tracking, performance monitoring, and citizen feedback. In other words, he looks at evidence not as a report that sits on a shelf, but as something that should shape planning and everyday delivery. Last year, I ran a LinkedIn mini series on the 7 foundations that we're talking about here. You can find the discussions in my featured posts. On the subject of evidence base, Pushkar made the point that solutions rooted in local context are going to be more practical, more cost effective, and more sustainable. And that's exactly the perspective that we are here to explore today. So, Pushkar, thank you so much for joining us and bringing the second foundation to life. Over
Thank
to
you,
you.
Zoe. Thank you so much for having me here. And I think this particular topic is quite a vast topic. We're going to try to clamp it up in a short span of time so that we can get some more Q&A going. But the idea is to be able to pass on the understanding of why evidence-based is so important when we take up any of these projects in waste management. As we all know, we are children of a lesser god because we don't have too much of money to spend on waste management. So it's more necessary that we use it pragmatically and deploy the funds such that we can get the best out of it. I'll start off with this particular slide here because I think this is important to understand that currently we are generating 2.56 billion tons of waste, and this is going to be This is projected to increase to 3.86 billion by 2050. That's almost a 100% jump that we'll be seeing. In fact, the type of waste, etc., is also going to be changing quite a lot as we progress and as the societies change. This also means that when you look at any of the reports currently, there are a lot of countries and cities that are not getting good waste management practices. Yeah, so they are not getting the services for collection of the waste, processing it, and hence they are all being going into a sort of a landfill. But they are basically dumping grounds. And while all of these being there is a huge potential in terms of how we can deploy funds and how can we save money here. With that particular context, I'm going to be moving to the next slide, which is where we will be talking about how do we build on evidence based thing and not on assumptions only. Yeah. So right now, when we look at the gap that we are looking at, it's more based on assumptions. And whenever we come up with assumption, that's where we are going to be going to play a catch-up game. So on the left-hand side, the general waste gaps that we have observed so far, yeah, and these are like just representative, it does not cover everything, but just a representative part is that the generation rates are borrowed from other cities. Yeah, there is not enough time spent or efforts involved for measuring local in part of it. And against that, when you look at the evidence-based thing, it starts with actually mapping out the waste flows. And when you look at waste flows, they have to be contextualized in the local context because every city has a different way in terms of how they generate the waste, in terms of how they take care of the waste, and where does it land up eventually. Plus, of course, the climatic and geographic conditions matter a lot, and which is why rooting them in local context is very essential. Second part, you look at health benefits. When we claim something that, hey, we have done this and this is what it has come with, it has actually taken away, let's say, an X type of a disease. There is no baseline kept saying that, okay, this is the numbers that we are at, and after we do the couple of interventions, it has improved in a certain way. So against that, when we look at health and environmental baselines, it's not always uh, possible to link A to A, but something that you can, like try to find out that where we are. In fact, in the last webinar, it was covered that when they did those interventions of drain cleaning and ensuring that waste collection is happening on a timely basis, they could see the number of malaria diseases reported in the hospitals had gone down. So that's a direct impact that comes out of it. Similarly, from an economic analysis and from a local financial realities, what is the market setup? Because I think I'll link it up with the second last point as well, where we are talking about local off-takers. Because when we look at any sort of evidence-based approach, we need to look at an end-to-end solution. Essentially, when we look at assumption-based approach, which is where you make silo decisions in silos, that's where a lot of the waste, uh, the efforts that we take for ensuring a complete waste cycle is like lost. So here we are looking at how can we bring in context of identifying that when I collect this waste and I process it or segregate it, who are my off takers? What are they going to be doing with that? How do I, ensure that there's a circularity concept that is built in terms of managing the waste? Similarly, one of the bigger chunk is in terms of geography and culture. Just also understanding how people currently are managing their waste. What is their culture? Because sometimes you want to, and this is typically what we have observed a lot, that we have a lot of Western solutions being put onto the developing countries, right? And that's where it fails a lot. And there are certain cases like we will come up with some examples of WT plants being failing and all. For me, the biggest ones in this one are the local off-takers and even ensuring a sustainable financing, which is the last point there, that all of this evidence-based approach helps to ensure that we are able to tap into sustainable financing mechanisms to make it more sustainable on its own, rather than just relying on grants or CSR support coming in. So that's the main thing. And to Zoe's point earlier, what she mentioned as well, that when we look at any strong evidence base, it's not only about perfect data, but it's also about looking at based on the available information, how best can we use it and how can we test the assumptions so that we can learn and adapt from it. Yeah, and it's a continuous thing. So it should not be something which is just on paper, but it helps us in making better decisions. With that, I'll come to this main slide, which is on the city planning flow. The first layer is talking about collection of the data. The second layer talks about integrating that into certain models. And the final layer is about outcomes that you can expect because of data that is collected earlier. So when you look at any sort of a city population part, you need to look at growth projections at least between 5 to 20 years so that it's not a knee-jerk solution that is being put in. Income distribution matters a lot because the type of waste and the waste generation rates also increase substantially. What is a ward level breakdown so that we can plan at a block level rather than planning at a city level, because eventually you will have to break it down from a city to a zone, multiple wards, and within the wards multiple blocks, right? So if you can break it down, that's the best in terms of making it localized. The second part of it is looking at characterization. Now, this is essentially important because when you look at characterization, you will be looking at what type of waste is coming out, where is it coming out from, what is my per capita generation of waste. And why this is important is that then you can model it to identify that if my population increases, then this is the potential increase in the waste generation that I will be foreseeing. And hence, what is the type of processing options that I need to adopt on the ground? For example, depending on whether you're looking at, let's say, WD plant setup, then you need to look at the composition to identify that there is enough calorific value available for making it self-sustaining for combustion. Similarly, for seasonal variation, you need to identify at least take 2 seasons. That's the recommendation, so that you can identify what is the change in the waste characteristics when the waste is going to come in and how it's going to be managed going forward. Similarly, going forward on that is the third part on GIS and topography. Uh, where is the existing infra? Where are my transfer stations going to be set up? Because based on the tonnage and the terrain, you need to identify where your transfer stations are going to be so that you can identify and set up the infra in a better way, including even landfill, right? So imagine this, that every corporation will give you a certain landfill which is to be filled up. But no one, if they have not done any study on the topography of that landfill, it's very difficult to estimate that if I dump, let's say, 100 tons of waste every month, how much time is going to take for that landfill to be filled up. All right, so that's a simple calculation that can be brought in when you look at GIS and topography planning involved in there. And local. I think I would cannot harp enough on that, but you need to be able to get people on board. Actually, because they are the ones who are going to be the generators as well as managers of the waste, including any informal worker system that is there. Try to see if that can be leveraged or made into a mainstream approach. What is the local geography, the climatic conditions around, the culture, the economic context. So all of these things are something that you'll need to be taking into account. Yeah. And always look at when you, let's say, even as a consultant or whatever role you go in, try to see if you are able to find local partners, because they will be able to give you a better context of what is happening, and that's where the relation can and the strategies and approach can be much more effective. I'm going to come to the integration layer, which is where we do the city-based modeling. So here is where we could look at growth projections, financial viability modeling, landfill projections based on the GIS study done earlier, including, let's say, resource planning, infrastructure planning. Resource planning is saying how many fleet of vehicles that you need based on the capacity, how many routes can you cover, what are the transfer stations, where are my connect points that are going to be there from an infrastructure perspective, your routes, and networking around that. The third one is on the circularity part. And my apologies if I'm going a bit fast. I just want to ensure that we get the context of what is there, and then we come back to the Q&A part. So that's where we would like to spend a bit more time so that it becomes more interactive and we can learn from each other. So processing and circularity part is the other area that you would have to look at in terms of you go again identifying local off-takers, and finally the landfill closure and planning, which is the essentially the point that I was mentioning earlier in terms of saying that, okay, if my certain waste is going to be dumped, it will take 4 years for a landfill to be filled up. But if I'm able to divert, let's say, 40% of the waste away from landfill, it increases my landfill life by another 7 years. So it goes to 11 years, right? So those are type of decisions that can be brought in. And finally is the outcomes. So operations monitoring brings in efficiency in terms of how do you deploy your resources, optimization of the cost, which is one thing I will talk about in my next slide. Building a circular economy framework instead of so you have the off-takers and people plugged in the ecosystem. You looked at sustainable financing, which is your carbon credits, plastic credits, EPRs, green credits, multiple of those that can be tapped in. And all of this data also can help in terms of setting up policy and governance protocols. But main thing to understand here is that it's not a one-time activity because it's going to be something that data changes, characteristics change, local conditions change. So you'll have to keep on recalibrating it at a certain point in time. So this is what we do essentially in terms of there are some examples of what we have been doing at EcoSense as well, where we do infrastructure mapping of the data based on which we plan the routes, etc. Looking at KPI based monitoring systems that you can come up with so that you take out the subjectivity and make it very objective driven to identify what's happening on the ground, and then coming up with some sort of frameworks here to identify at the ward level how can I come up with assessment frameworks for different cases. Like for example, this particular framework is about identifying segregation at source at certain ward level or block level, and whether is it good part or not happening. So you can then come up with more of those IEC, the information education communication sort of activities which are contextually based. This was the example I was trying to mention earlier when we looked at evidence based. So this is a real example where before we actually looked at data and identified, okay, where is my vehicle going around and the amount of waste that it is collected. It was earlier running around 82 kilometers per day, which eventually with optimization models we came up to 55 kilometers per day, and that if you add on the numbers, and of course, with the increase in the fuel cost now, it actually is a substantial gain without having to do too much of over engineering in there. So beyond the cost part of it, I think I would also mention quickly about the sustainable financing part, which is very, very important. You have health environment benefits that can be there. You have social and governance part, which is something driven based on KPIs, and it makes it much more transparent, and hence there is a lot of public trust that can be gained. And essentially investability, right? So we all need funds coming in, and funds can come in only when you have more evidences that you're providing. Similarly, and I think I would just wanted to put this slide here because beyond municipal waste, there is also a lot of things that happen with EPR, with plastic credits, carbon credits. And this was something which we talked about a product passport. So I just put in a very rough one here. But when you even look at products that are manufactured from the manufacturer to the distributor to the consumer, and eventually being discarded end of life, that entire cycle can be digitized. And this is where some of the AI based solutions on waste identification can also be plugged in, and all of these helps you to identify and tap for any of this sort of credits that can be there, right? So it brings in that sort of accountability. You can use that data in multiple ways. I'm not going to spend time on that right now, but yes, there are multiple avenues and modes that you can look at. I wanted to leave you guys with some of these real hands-on things that you could tap in. And this is based on information that is available, like in the open source, but something I just wanted to bring it together here, where one thing is on frameworks. So on the left-hand side column, you'll find what are the steps that can be done when you look at any sort of evidence-based approach, starting with baseline waste audits, GIS topography, modeling, digital operations layer, and always involving the citizens because they are the main, the generator as well as the stakeholders, and the tools resources that you can tap in here. And a lot of these tools are very, very important, and essentially something that are like a guiding framework, like the WAC tool from UN Habitat, and I believe a lot of us might also already be using that. And some of the tips that you can tap in here, combining study with GIS information and landfill timeline mapping and monitoring part of it, and making it finance ready, which is essentially why all of this evidence base also makes it like something which you can roll out faster. And whether you're a municipality or a funder or an NGO or a consultant, I think the approaches might be a bit different, but all of us are trying to get to the same way, part of ensuring waste management and efficiency at the ground level, which is where you could look at multiple type of data points that can be tapped in. And I just would leave you with some examples of WT plans, right? We have seen a lot of these WT plans failing because the WT plant has not done characterization study before it was set up. And then you have a lot of this mixed waste coming in or organic waste, which is almost like 65-35 when you look at developing countries. And that's where, it's not does not have the enough calorific fraction in there, and hence it fails. Some slides here. This is again something which might be helpful for you to like keep in mind. Like when we do any sort of this, of course, the cost matters, the timeline matters, and what is the methodology that you can adopt. So here I've tried to put in something where what sort of activity, who you can engage to make it happen. Approximate cost, I think it's just something which is a guiding one. It's not exact, so things can change based on local conditions. Timelines that you can look at. What I wanted to leave you that with is that if you look at this entire cost that you spend for doing any sort of evidence-based planning and looking at, let's say, 500,000 population city, it is roughly coming to around 80, 90K or 100K, for example. Yeah. And vis-a-vis that, if you look at the refuse compactor truck cost, it's already covering everything. So it's at a fraction of a cost. If you just put in those methodologies and steps in place, you can make things happen better from a long-term project perspective. And these are some of the steps that are there, also part of the WACT tool. So you can go through this and you will leverage and use this methodology to be able to do your evidence-based planning at this at the ground level. And these are the references. So I'll leave you with this slides here. I'll stop my sharing, and now I think Zoe, I would be happy to take up any questions that come up.
Thank you so much, Pushkar, for a really thorough and fascinating presentation. And before anyone asks, yes, I do believe Pushkar is very happy to share his slides with you all afterwards. So as long as you're signed up to the Global Waste Lab newsletter, you'll be receiving that from Sweta. So before we continue with the discussion, because I've got lots of deep questions for you, and I'm sure there's already a couple in the Q&A, so thanks to you who have already added your questions. But I think it's time for us to do another audience poll quickly. Sweta, would you please put up the question? Here we go. So, barrier to using evidence. What is the biggest barrier to building and using a stronger evidence base in your context? Is it that you don't have enough time or money? Is it that the available data just isn't reliable? Do you lack the skills and the tools and the institutional capacity to get the data that you need and to manage that data? Or maybe you've got the data, but it's all in different places and it doesn't match up and it's all fragmented. No one's really clear who owns the data, so you can't bring it together to really learn from it. Do you have the data in a nice format, but you can't turn that into decisions? We've got a lot of options here. Or is it a difficulty in maintaining the data once the project is operational? Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to consider those and let us know what you think. Like, I've worked with a lot of waste management teams and I've said to them, like, collect your data. And yes, Zoe, we will. And then I come back a few months later, I'm like, right, where's your data? And there's hardly anything there. And I'm like, well, how can we learn and improve your operations and help you become more cost effective and deliver a better service if we're not keeping good records of what you're doing, how much it's costing, what it's achieving? Okay, so let's see the results now. Okay, right. So the highest we've got is fragmented data, weak sharing or unclear ownership. I think that's quite unsurprising, really. And then the second most selected choice was poor availability or reliability of data. And then we had a few people saying, yes, limited time and money, lack of skills and tools, can't turn out information into decisions, but very few people saying that the challenge is maintain the data once a project is operational. So let's start with this fragmented data and so on. I'm going to start with my first question to Pushkar, which is that if a city or a council, because I know many people here don't work in big cities, they're often maybe secondary cities or towns or even villages, if they can only collect a small amount of data before investing in a new system, what do they absolutely need to know? What's the minimum useful evidence base?
Uh, I think one of the key thing is that for any city, right, they already have the data available with them. They're collecting the property taxes. So if you're able to ask them that, hey, in my city, how many properties are there between residential and commercial? What is the scale at which they are? And let's say for residential, if you are able to just put in some rules saying that based on the study for that local area, let's say it's 450 grams per person per day, right? You assume a household with three people, four people, depending on some assumptions that you can go with still. Uh, and from there, you can build up data to identify what is my amount of waste that is going to be picked up or collected or generated rather uh, by what level, right? And that data point can help you to identify what is my infrastructure requirement going to be without even going into too much of maths or even on the ground. So those are few things that you can start with essentially before going to anyone. One of the key thing that have observed is that because evidence base is something which comes up at a much later stage, getting people to see the value before is the key thing. And if you're able to do that math and go to them and present it to them, I think you have someone who can be a champion for you in that particular municipality or city.
Yeah, I like that point, Pushka. Thank you. And one of the things that I really picked up on from your slides was that data doesn't just help with operations, but it can also help with building trust. And as we discussed in last week's webinar with Mayor Bensouda, trust and behavior change and service performance kind of they're all they all serve each other, don't they? You
Yep.
can't get people to change their behavior until they can see that there is a reliable collection service that is going to turn up every week, or that if
True.
we're asking people to separate their waste, they need to see that it's not all being put back together again in one mixed truck.
Correct.
um
Absolutely.
Sometimes I don't know, I see a lot in Europe, the collection trucks, they do have silos inside them. And I feel
Mhm.
like it's a massive missed comms opportunity because people don't see that. They just see the bins being all emptied into the one truck and they think it's all getting mixed in together. So
Yep.
then trust is lost and people think, well, why should I bother? And that then affects operations, which affects the finance and makes the whole thing less affordable. So it's, all of this does really tie together. And I like how you tied in your points with these other foundations from the resilient waste system, 7 foundations, because they are all very interrelated. So on that, okay, so we've got the quantitative data that we can collect on, tons and composition and the location of or densely populated low income areas, less densely populated middle income areas, and the different waste generation that we would expect from those places. But what I'd like to find out from you is, how do you combine technical data, this quantitative data, with what communities and workers already know? Yeah, how do we make these the kind of the data gathering more inclusive so that as consultants or advisors or as council officers, we're not missing a big bit of information that could really help to inform our system?
That's a very interesting question because I think it also brings in that part of inclusivity, right? So getting the citizens to be more engaged with their waste and owning up their waste. Because right now it is like out of sight, out of mind, right? I just throw it down and then it's all gone. Especially happens with places where you have the apartments and you have a shoot culture, right? So you open the chute and just throw it down. So you just don't see what is happening there with that waste. One thing could be like, of course, the behavioral changes have to be, like it has to be an iterative process and you have to keep updating and coming up with. But my observation has been that if you are able to come up with much more data points that you can give them, saying that, hey, from this region, this was from your area, this was the waste that was generated, and average waste was this, etc. And let's say the segregation levels was a bit lower. You could also come up with some healthy competition between two different blocks in that ward to say that this block is doing good or not. So it's just about something which keeps them engaged. And eventually, you see that change coming in quite a lot because people do want to be felt included in there. You could tell them that you could run IC campaigns through any of these digitization tools to say that, hey, this is what has been happening. Linking it up with generative AI is not very difficult. They can just look up and say, how do I do my compost at home, etc. So those things definitely help a lot.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Hamza is here in the Q&A. Thanks for your questions, Hamza. I'm asking if you've seen any data that's been consistently built around behavioural change towards waste segregation. So any insights that you've got there?
I think that's one of the most neglected area, to be very honest, because while we are looking at the bigger picture of doing a lot of things, I think behavioral change is very, very difficult. First thing to get it drilled down. Second thing is that there's not many data points that are there. So if you're able to do that at a certain level and then scale it up to a ward level or zone level, that will be more helpful. But my observation has been that it has been very, very localized
Mm,
and something which for some reason has not been able to scale up because it needs a lot of those sort of the impact happening all across the place. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, happy to hear if anyone has any, Zoe, if you have any different observations on that front.
Sure. No, I completely agree. It takes a long time. So when I first started working in waste management in 2002, the council that I was working for, we were rolling out the first ever recycling collection program. So we were collecting the residual waste and the recycling. And it's taken, a long time to get up to a good level of participation and capture rate. So by participation, it's how many houses in the street, for example, are actively separating their recyclables.
Yeah.
And then capture rate is, if say I'm a householder, am I separating all of my recyclables or just some of them? So you've got two targets there with behavior change to achieve, which is it's not easy and it does take time. And I think that one of the biggest lessons that I've seen councils learning is that people like it people like to no one wants to feel like they're the one that's left out. Yeah,
Yeah.
people want to feel that they're in the majority. So if only one or two households in the street are clearly separating their waste, then there's no pressure on me to do so. But if 80% of the households are doing it, then I start to think, oh, hang on, I don't want to be the
Yeah.
outlier. I don't want to be the only one that's not doing it. So I better change my behavior to join in with the crowd. And that's, we see that, and that's quite consistent across different income levels, and different cultures as well. I think it's very much human nature and definitely something
True.
that we can tap into with our communications then to get people to participate in the way that we need them to.
Absolutely. And if I can just share one example of, so the recent waste management rules 2026, which are published by Government of India, there are a lot of changes that are happening with the bulk waste generators being asked to take up ownership of their waste. And the government is digitizing that at the central level. So imagine the country as the size of India, and then all of the data is going to be centralized at some point, where they're asking the BWGs to be registered and being able to push their data to the portal regularly. Second example of that is when we were looking at two-way segregation, four-way segregation. One of a very good use case was in Panji in Goa, where they are doing 16-way segregation at the society level. And I was like amazed with the way that it was being done. But it was participative both from the societies because they were able to see value in there. Since they are able to also, sell their waste and get some revenue out of it. Uh, but the corporation or the councils are also being very supportive of that, and they are looking at how can we give them property tax rebates. So it's a win-win situation for everyone in that case.
Nice. Collecting the data and then using that data to further incentivize communities.
True.
Yeah, love it, love
Yeah.
it. Okay, awesome. Right, going back to the poll questions. A lot of people on this webinar said that one of the biggest challenges that they're facing is fragmented data, weak
Mhm.
sharing, or unclear ownership. Can you give us an example of where you might have seen that and how that challenge was overcome?
I think it's a practical challenge when you actually start trying to get data. People are first and foremost very apprehensive because they feel that you're going to misuse the data.
Okay.
Simple example, like when you are going to a landfill, they do not give you that data because they feel that people can backtrace it to say that okay, how much is coming, and there are challenges, there are loopholes in the entire ecosystem over there. So from that perspective, I guess what can happen is that we will have to look at where some of the data points are collected, which from suppliers or from any third party that you need. So when you look at data collection, first and foremost, try to compartmentalize and say which are my main guys from where the data can come. How can I get it? Whether is there a direct way or is that an assumption that I can build in for getting it? So wherever you can actually make a very a proper scientific assumption, I think go with that instead of breaking your head over not being able to get any information. Because
Yeah,
better than no information, you can at least make some much more, structured or scientific guesses around it. The
sure.
second part is then look at stakeholders and see, get them to understand the bigger picture of what you're trying to do. But yeah, I guess it's something which is in the works, right? So you have to keep going and uh, harping on it to get that data point, what you're looking
That's
at.
it. No, I think that's a great answer. In my experience, like, a waste data project, if you like, it's not something that happens overnight, is it? It's not
Yeah.
like build the spreadsheet and the data will come, and we'll
True.
know exactly how to use that data and we'll be making really informed decisions and saving a load of money. It's not like that, is it? We have to, it's kind of an iterative process.
True.
So bit by bit, you can build
Yeah.
to it and then get, comparing different data sets, seeing where the value of that data is for your decision making, and then drilling down into that more and more so that you can, save more money, run a more efficient service, achieve better targets, and so on.
Yeah, I
No,
think just to sorry quickly Zoe add on to that. It's also when you say an iterative process, sometimes you are also not very clear what data you need, right, in the
yeah,
upfront. So it's something that comes up much later based on observations or something that comes up as a problem. Then you realize that maybe I should have collected that data, and then you go back to the drawing board, and that is very normal. It's
yeah,
not a fault. It's just the way the entire thing works.
absolutely, absolutely. Or you do a survey and then realize that you asked a question the wrong way, and
Yeah,
the
exactly.
answers that
Yes.
you've got, yeah, yeah. Data
True.
collection is both an art and a science, isn't it? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. Okay. So Laura, hi Laura, in the Q&A. Thank you so much for your question. Laura has asked, could you give insight on the gap of data availability of urban versus rural areas?
Hmm.
Should one prioritize urban areas where more waste is generated in a smaller area, or rural areas where service provision might be trickier and people might be more likely to be dumping and burning their waste because there's no other alternative?
Hmm. I think see now it depends. Both areas need support, right? Let's put it that way.
Mm.
For the urban part of it, I think there are a lot of players that are already there. So if you want to like make a mark, my suggestion would be like go to tier two, tier three cities because that's where the impact can be more. You don't have to look at a small village, but look at cluster of areas and then combine them together because these guys are looking at someone who can manage their waste, and you can set up central decentralized units which is like covering a group of let's say 10 villages or areas, and then scale it up from there. Because even in the urban level the same thing happens, right? There's a local level aggregator, there's a second level aggregator, then it goes to the big level aggregator, then it goes to the recycler. So there are multiple chains that come in. You could look at both options to be adopted. The type of waste is going to be different between rural as compared to an urban. So your solutions will also not be the same, right? So you'll have to look at what type of solutions and approach that you can look up over there. Your even including your collection frequency might not have to be like every day sending a vehicle to collect the waste. It
Mm.
can be sent periodically as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, great. So having that data really helps you to design a system around the actual context rather than assumptions that we might make.
true.
And so going back to another point that you were making earlier as well about finance. So how data can help you attract finance for your waste management system. And I always feel like it's kind of chicken and egg, because if we're not managing our waste, how can we have any data on it? And
True.
if we don't have any data on it and we don't know what waste we've got, how we, in turn, we can't get the finance then to manage it better.
Absolutely.
So it is kind of chicken and egg, and I think that oftentimes councils get a bit hung up on this need for perfect data. Oh, we need to apply for funding to get consultants in to get us this perfect data so that we can put that in a proposal for more funding. And it's like this endless um endless journey of trying to get funding in. But I think quite often there are lower cost ways that councils, so I'm thinking particularly now of the smaller and more rural councils, there's ways that they can get data and work together, first of all, because you're more likely to attract funding if you can show that you are working in partnership with your neighbours. And then there are also ways that they can get enough data to make a start without needing outside consultants to come in, $20,000 on a waste composition study. For a lot of councils, that is just, it's never going to happen. So what can councils do if they don't have the budget? What have you seen perhaps? Are there any examples where you think like, yeah, they did really well. They managed to get started without having, that first outside funding, and then that helped them attract more money to deliver the service.
Yeah, true. In fact, see, for any project to start, you need funds coming
Mm,
in, right? And the funds will come if you're able to go with a structured approach and show the impact as well. So that's the reason why clustering helps when you are able to combine like a few places around and then show that joint impact. It helps a lot. Uh, Second part of it is that any project should not be like so much reliant on grants and subsidies that after the grant and subsidy is exhausted the project fails, and that happens invariably multiple times. So the idea is also to how to make it sustainable, right, in the long run. Now carbon credits is one area, but just taking one example over there, but a lot of people have observed here is that they look at carbon credits as a business, right? So they are looking at that in a very siloed way. And when you do not look at the holistic perspective of seeing whether really there is a potential of generating a carbon credit, before you actually go into all that thing of consultancy fees, etc., I think it can be a very small quick study to say what is my potential. Am I able to generate, let's say, $10,000 a year out of this, or plastic credits, right? So there could be something that can be done, and you have to look at creative mechanisms. I guess your webinar series 7 is looking at sustainable financing, which is where it will be covered quite well, to look at creative financing, because we have to get creative, look at how you can bring in corporates to be part of it, and things like that. So plastic credits is also another area, linking it up back with EPR and saying, am I able to give them more? Uh, be creative, identify what sort of funding mechanisms that can be tapped in, because there are multiple of them. It's just that, our perspective is limited to our, the level of thinking. But if we open our uh, think out of the box, I think it can open up more doors for everyone.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Think outside the box. And although carbon credits and plastic credits, they're not guaranteed, and you
Yeah,
might, you might collect the data and then try to sell the credits, but people don't want to buy historic credits. So then you've done the work, but you can't get the money for it. So it's not cut and dry, is it? Which is why
yeah,
diversifying your income streams, whether that's through fees from households, fees from businesses, some corporate social responsibility, some extended producer responsibility, and so on, just to help it helps build the resilience then in the financing of your system. But you're quite right, that is another one of the foundations, and that's one that we're going to be covering later on in the series. So I'm not going to
yeah,
labor the point, but without the data you're not going to get any of that.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Super. Right. I'm going to move on to, Kartik's got two questions in here. Hi, Kartik. Thanks for joining us. Um, right. I'm going to deal with your first question first, which is often monitoring focus gets to service level indicator. Any thoughts on benchmarking key operational data of waste for cities? So,
I think that's very important, because I completely agree with Karthik that a lot of the times it gets very service focused, right? So whether my vehicle has gone to a particular house
Yeah,
for
like
providing a
input
service of
focus rather
collection.
than outcome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
rather
yeah.
than outcome driven. So definitely it gets limited to that. But there are a lot of operational KPIs that can be built in. Something that can be as simple as saying that, hey, are my vehicles being deployed on time on a daily basis, right? Because if you think about it and keeping different stakeholders in mind, the municipality has the objective or has a stated objective saying that every vehicle has to get deployed, let's say by 7 a.m. in the morning. If you do not, then there is a penalty condition that comes in play. So now there's a carrot and stick approach. There's no carrot, but there's a stick over there saying that okay, you have to be able to deploy your vehicles. So one thing is, of course, you can look at some sort of KPIs that can be made available there. The second part of it is that, but here you're then only servicing the municipality, right? So municipality is saying that okay, all my things are being met, which is good, but the waste management company is felt thinking that hey, I'm just being pressurized. So how do you turn it around, and whether you can help them to save cost by the one example that I was giving about optimizing their routes for collection, or giving them data which they can go back to the municipality and say that hey, I don't need to send a vehicle for dry waste collection on a daily basis. Why not we change the scheduling and say that this is the I'll send a vehicle for wet waste and I'll send a separate vehicle every second day or third day for dry waste. And that could be a good saving. But how will that saving come is only when you leverage that data available and help them to go back with something which is backed up saying that this is the proof why I'm asking for it and I'm not just asking for it from thin air. So those things have to be brought in. You need to bring in the value for both the stakeholders. If you
Yeah.
just make it more compliance driven, right? I mean, it will just be a check in the box and it will just be there on the paper.
Yeah, yeah, great. And also there's data that we can bring in about customer satisfaction. You know,
Mhm.
did households get the service that they were expecting every week? Because
Yeah,
that, as we discussed earlier, has a knock-on impact on their participation in the service and their willingness to
correct.
pay for it as well, right? So
Yeah.
um it's all connected. Okay, final question from Kartik, and then I've got a kind of forwards-looking question after that, and then we'll look to wrap up. So, from your experience, what is a minimum digital infrastructure needed for maintaining a good data record of waste services in a city?
I think essentially right now with GPS that is there, you could leverage GPS for multiple ways, including let's say any sort of mobile applications that are something that can be plugged in with the operational part of it. My suggestion always is never to go for capex heavy investment, because till the time you do not get a hang of how the operations are working on the ground, making those sort of over engineering digital interventions makes it something which has always a pushback, right? Because the person on the ground, if they're not going to use it, how much ever fancy a tool you make, it's just
Yeah,
going to fail. So go with minimal interventions that as much as possible. See if you can leverage QR instead of RFID tags and stuff like that. Again, when you look QR, you don't have to put in too much of administrative overheads because there's an operational, the time with scanning a QR, etc. So those things have to be put in mind, and which is why I always feel that first look at who the people are, train them, get them to speed, and then start putting in things one by one.
yeah.
So that might be a way to go ahead.
I love that. Yeah, because I see there's obviously companies that provide very detailed waste data systems. But if you're at the very beginning of your waste data journey, let's say, that can be quite overwhelming, and you don't have the resources to collect all that data anyway.
True.
So sometimes I think it's best for just to start where you are, wherever you are,
Yeah.
just start with an
Correct.
Excel spreadsheet, decide, what data can we get hold of at the moment? Is it number of trucks arriving at the dump site? Is it, customer satisfaction with the service? Is
Yeah.
it open burning incidents? Now, I've been working with UNITAR, the United Nations Institute on Training and Research in the Gambia, and we've been building the country's first ever waste data system for compliance with the Stockholm Convention. So we need to identify how much waste is being burned in the open, at informal dump sites or in backyards or whatever, to estimate the persistent organic pollutants being
Oh,
released from that. Yeah, right. So, but if you're starting with no data, there isn't a weighbridge in the country.
yeah.
A lot of the waste is still collected by donkey and cart. So, where do you start? You have to start with something
Correct.
really simple and something that's not going to be overwhelming for the officers who are required to fill that in. So is it going to be
Correct.
daily? Probably not. It's probably, weekly is probably the right level. And then we're not going to have 50 data points. We're going to start with like 8 or 12 data points and
Yeah.
just see how that goes. Trial that for 6 months to a year, see what kind of data we get. And one really interesting approach from the Stockholm Convention that I would encourage people to use as well is to identify the confidence level that you have in your data.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Wow.
because sometimes we are making assumptions and guesses, but then those numbers can get hard baked into models, and if actually we weren't confident about that data in the first place, we've then lost that information.
Yeah. Yeah.
Suddenly it's hard baked, it's a fact, and we're basing big investment decisions on something that actually was a guess. So it's
True.
important to be recording those confidence levels as well, I think, because that can be as valuable a piece of data as
It
anything,
is.
really. So yeah, good to see kind of international best practice and how that can be brought into local municipal systems. And then also I think having a dashboard is very helpful so that people can see at a
Yeah.
glance what kind of performance we're
Hmm.
looking at and where the red flags are, what really needs our attention, so that we know
Yeah.
where to focus the resources that we have. Um, so all of that really, really useful. Now, we've only got a few minutes left, so very, very briefly, and I'm sorry that we didn't leave much time for this because I think it's a really interesting one. We are in the age of AI. There's a lot of talk about digital product passports and traceability. So looking 5 years ahead, Pushkar, where will all of these, very cutting edge technologies make the biggest practical difference? And what do we need to have in place to be able to leverage that?
Um, okay. Wow, that's quite a,
Yeah, five
question
minutes to
which
go.
no, no, absolutely. So I think with AI and all, it's something which is going to see an uptake for the
Yeah,
next few years because it's a new tech, new thing coming in. At some point, it's going to get more optimal with the usage and along with it, the carbon footprint because right now the carbon footprint is very, very high. So you might be, generating more carbon rather to save something, which becomes
yeah,
that sort of thing. Uh, Make it balanced, I would say because a lot of times we try to over engineer it immediately
see
and
that.
I guess yeah, see, technology for me is just the lever to be able to achieve something. It's not a solution. Yeah,
Mm,
you can leverage technology in that way. So whatever works is something that you should tap in. Now at some cases like when you have those big MRF plants and you have robotics and all where the computer vision and analytics and robotics come in play, it makes sense because they are huge. But for decentralized ones, you really don't need that much of a
mm,
high tech solution over there because then it also is a balance between generating employment locally and giving them the benefit and over the use of technology part of it.
yeah,
So I guess it's going to be balanced. The second part of it is that AI is not going away anywhere, but it's just a way we can probably leverage it more to make it more fruitful and help to achieve our objectives in a better way. And if that is something like having a digital passport or anything, but not for every other product, it can be for the high value or the main products like electronic waste or whatever. Start with there. Probably it might be something which can give you a benefit. You don't need a QR coded EPR thing for a packet of biscuits, right? So
yeah,
it's as simple as that.
yeah. No, I love that. Thank you, Pushka. That's so what I think, just to summarize that back to you, it's like use technology proportionately, right?
Yeah.
Don't go overboard. Like look at the value of the information that you're actually going to get from that,
Yeah.
and keep the focus on the actual service, on the outcomes, rather than on just collecting data for the sake of it. And I think that yeah,
True.
there's I mean, digital product passports. At the moment, the focus hasn't been so much on what happens when that product becomes a waste, particularly if it's moved, for example, out of the European Union and into a region that doesn't have, such high-tech sorting systems and so on. Are we able to carry the value of that data across to wherever that product or packaging becomes a waste?
Yeah,
Or are we just transferring the burden? And I think it's really
absolutely.
important that we get that balance right.
Just if I can add one quick point, because I know time is getting there. But if we are able to bring in something where it helps the recycling part later,
Yeah.
which means that if that product or the QR or whatever is able to give me a composition of what is it, so that I can break it down and then take it up for recycling, I think that's where technology can also help a lot.
Yeah, yeah. So that's it. You heard it here first, folks. All of this is going to enable the circular economy on a much deeper level and on an international level. And it doesn't matter whether we're in big cities or rural areas. There's always
Yeah,
something we can do to improve the situation using the data that we're able to collect where we are, and to start where we are, not go for something, really, really high tech. If we haven't got any data yet, just start where we are, go simply step by step and build up your evidence base like that. Thanks a lot, Pushkar. Really, really appreciate you joining us and showing how evidence can move from a baseline study into planning, accountability, and everyday service improvement, and ultimately to enable a circular economy. Your insights have been hugely valuable. Thank you to everybody who has been here. We've had another 60 people join us today, which has been wonderful. Thank you for your engagement and all the questions. I'd also like to thank Sweta and Be Wastewise for bringing us together. And once again, to everybody who joined us today, your poll responses, questions, and contributions have, as ever, made this a much richer conversation. One message I hope we take away is that limited data doesn't mean doing nothing. It means using the best evidence available, being clear about uncertainty, testing assumptions, carrying the greatest risk, and then building review and learning into the system from the start. So thanks again, Pushkar. Really, really appreciate you being here, and you've added a lot to this series. So thank you. Sweta,
thank you,
if you
Zoe.
could, thank you. Sweta, if you could please bring up the slide about our next session, which is on Wednesday, the 19th of August at 9 a.m. UTC, and that's with Lakshmi Menon, Head of Impact at Clean Hub. And we'll be exploring the third foundation, which is, well, we're not going necessarily in order, but a third foundation, appropriate solutions. Since you're already registered for the series, you should find the invitation already in your calendar in the correct time zone for wherever you are. So look, today has been about understanding the system well enough to make sound decisions. And our next session is about choosing solutions that genuinely fit the local context, waste streams, markets, skills, infrastructure, behaviours, and resources. And there's not enough money in waste management to waste it on the wrong technology. Lakshmi will help us examine how to judge whether an option is fit for purpose, affordable to operate and maintain, and capable of adapting as local conditions change. This is the second of our Built to Last webinars. I hope you'll join us for the rest of the series. You can find details of all the upcoming sessions, as well as the free resilience review on the Global Waste Lab website, globalwastelab.com. Thanks again. I hope to see many of you on the 19th of August, and I'm handing back to Sweta now for a final message. Thanks so much. Thanks again, Pushkar. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Pushkar. I think Zoe pretty much summarized it. If you have colleagues or friends who will be interested in the series, please forward the invite to them. They will be registered for the entire series, and all the recordings will go up on the Be Waste Wise YouTube as well as the Global Waste Lab YouTube channels. So thank you, folks. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks so much. Thank you all for joining.
Hey,
Thanks
thank you,
again,
Zoe.
Pushkar.
Thanks, Shweta. Bye.
Thanks.